Díomh chuirde go léir agus is mór an ordum fáilte mór a choróibh an ó cháid seo. Is mise orlaí lein Uachtarán in Ollscoil Technoliaachta an Atlantic. So a warm welcome to you all here this evening, and especially warm welcome to those of you joining us online. It's our great pleasure to be hosting this event here in Atlantic Technological University. We are a new, young university established on the 1st of April of this year, so we're only about 7 or 8 months old, but we came together as 3 founding institutions: IT Sligo, Letterkenny IT and Galway Mayo Institute of Technology. And between the 3 of us, we have 150 years of history, 50 years each, coming together. And our past and our history would very much inform what we're about today: technical education, technological education, strong commitment to engineering, sciences, practice-based disciplines, and apprenticeships. So we would have a very strong interest in the topic that's being covered here this evening, and it's again my great pleasure to welcome the European Commission representation here this evening. The topic this evening is on energy, and given that we are at Atlantic Technological University campuses right up along the west-northwestern region of Ireland, the potential for us in terms of energy, in terms of sustainability, is enormous. We're in the process of developing our first strategic plan, and I have no doubt that sustainability will feature either as a strong cross-cutting theme or else a very strong pillar in its own right. So welcome here to the Arrivo Auditorium in our Sligo campus, and happy now to hand over to Steve O'Shea, who will be your moderator and facilitator for the panel discussion. Gur Magwith.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flynn, for those warm words of welcome. And on behalf of the European Commission representation in Ireland, welcome to you all, both in person and online. And particular thanks to Atlantic Technological University for hosting us on this Energy Roadshow. Stephen O'Shea is my name, and I'm the Deputy CEO of European Movement Ireland, and we're delighted to be working on behalf of the European Commission on these events which have been taking place across the country. The purpose is very much to listen to your views, and that's why we're in Sligo tonight. The war that Russia unleashed on Ukraine earlier this year was a stark reminder that the EU's dependency on fossil fuels, particularly from Russia, was not sustainable. Of course, Ireland has a slightly different situation in terms of our sources of energy, but the effects have been similar: rising prices and a situation that is heavily impacting the wider economy and society. And across Europe, the war has shown that the EU cannot do business with somebody who threatens it and wages war against one of its closest neighbours. So in that sense, the transition to homegrown renewable energy is not only good for the environment, but has become a strategic investment in security for the European Union. And because every kilowatt hour of electricity we generate from solar, wind and hydropower or biomass reduces dependency on fossil fuels in general. So for the European Union to get rid of this dependency on Russian oil, gas and coal and other fossil fuels, we have to diversify supply away from Russia and towards more reliable suppliers, boost energy efficiency and energy savings, and massively reinvest in renewables. And phasing out the dependence on fossil fuels can be done as soon as possible, as indicated in the European Commission's RePowerEU plan, and this is happening already. The Commission has proposed measures that would allow Europe to significantly reduce gas imports, and it's an ambitious and ongoing process. And with the new proposal, RePowerEU, we can speed up this transition even more, diversifying gas supplies, speeding up the rollout of renewable energy, and saving energy across our economies and societies. And every euro we invest in renewables and energy efficiency is a down payment on our future energy independence. And so to discuss these issues and more tonight, we have a fantastic panel of experts working at the forefront. Beside me is Dave Linehan. He's Head of Research at Wind Energy Ireland, and as a member of the leadership team there, part of his remit is to oversee evidence building and policy priming research across all aspects of onshore and offshore wind and other sustainable technologies. He's responsible for leading engagement with universities and the academic sector. Mairead Hogan is ESB Senior Environmental Consultant for ONE Wind Farm, and Mairead has an MSc in Sustainable Development and a Diploma in Environmental Engineering. She's worked for over 22 years in the energy sector in a diverse range of roles aimed at achieving energy and climate targets. And Will Rudrow is the Divisional Director of Woodrow and Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. He's an exceptionally experienced environmental professional with over 35 years spent working and studying in the sector in UK and Ireland. He founded the Woodrow Environmental Consultancy in 2004 and as Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Technology and Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. He actively promotes the highest standards of practice for the benefit of nature and society through policy training and supports. So in a few seconds, we'll hear from Dave, Mairead and Will. Then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, both those of you in the room and those of you tuning in from home, and we'll be finished in about an hour and 15 minutes. You can submit your questions in two ways. For those of you in the room, you can raise your hand, but you can also, for those in the room and online, submit them using the Slido app. So it's slido.com, and the hashtag is RePowerEU. So you can just go to slido.com, stick in the hashtag, and it'll allow you to submit those questions online. And finally, the event is being broadcast live on YouTube and other social channels, and we encourage you to join the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag RePowerEU. But for now, I'll hand over to our first speaker, who is Dave.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and indeed Orla, for the warm introduction. Delighted to be with you, everybody, this evening here in Sligo, and for those tuning in online as well. As mentioned in the introduction, I work for an organisation called Wind Energy Ireland. We represent about 180 different members, companies active right across the entire spectrum of wind development on and offshore, and other supporting technologies as well. Very proud to work for that organisation. It's an organisation that has been growing rapidly, as indeed has the entire sector over the past couple of years in particular. And as the, I suppose, look ahead to 2030 and beyond shows, that growth is likely to continue and to present lots of opportunities for new people moving into the sector too. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about a number of different topics, but broadly across the areas of energy supply as it stands today, touching on our climate action ambition for 2030 and 2050, and then I suppose most importantly talking about the economic opportunities for this entire country, which are given to us by the growth of renewables as we seek to decarbonise the economy over the coming decades. I'll start, I suppose, this evening by setting the scene briefly for you. And if we look at the month of October just past, it's been, I guess, a really successful year to date for wind production and for supplying homes, schools and businesses from wind energy. The most recent data we've seen for year to date shows about 1/3 of the entire economy has been powered by wind so far this year. Last month in particular was a very strong month. We had about 47% of power across the country came from wind farms. The very first wind farm, in fact, is celebrating its 30th birthday this very month. A wind farm developed up in northwest Mayo, a place called Bellacorrick. And since then, the country has gone on to build about 300 wind farms, which are still operating today. One of those wind farms is an offshore wind farm. It was built back in 2004 off the coast of Arklow. But across the next 10 years, we're going to see the growth rapidly of a huge amount of new offshore wind generation at scale, alongside more onshore wind farms too. Looking ahead to that future, I suppose it's very clear from government policy nationally, but also European policy, that we do need to rapidly decarbonise our power sector and the wider economy if we are to overcome climate change. The government that we have today, to be fair to them, have been very ambitious in this regard. In the past number of years, a number of really ambitious targets have been set for 2030 in particular. For example, we've seen a new ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the country by 51% by 2030 relative to 2018 levels. And that puts us second in the world in terms of the scale of ambition set by this government. Beyond 2030 to towards 2050, we now have a national ambition to have a net zero society. So across the entire economy, we're going to have to change the way we live. In the next couple of weeks, the government will publish the updated and revised Climate Action Plan, which will be the first action plan published since the sectorial emission ceilings budgets were published by the government across the summer, setting really strong targets, not just for the power sector, which I represent, but for all other aspects of the economy too. So it'll be really important to see the action now that we have the ambition and the targets set out. Coupled with that national ambition, of course, in an EU context, we've also seen really strong signals towards green investment for the coming number of years. The scene, I guess, was very much set back in 2019 with the publication of the Clean Energy Package. But from an EU policy perspective, we've recently seen a huge upscale in ambition with the RePowerEU package, which I know was introduced by Stephen. That plan sets Europe as a whole on a trajectory towards 45% of the energy in Europe coming from renewables by 2030. And it will represent across the next number of years an investment requirement of some 210 billion euros across member states. On that topic of investment, I just wanted to add some concluding thoughts from our perspective around economic opportunities coming from the wind energy sector. And I suppose more broadly and tied to that, the opportunities that will bring also in terms of jobs, in terms of education and reskilling, opportunities for people looking to enter the renewable sector. The industry I work in today employs approximately 6,000 people. That will need to grow massively as we ramp up towards 2030 and beyond. We're talking about new, clean, green, sustainable jobs. We're talking about good jobs in areas such as planning, ecology, engineering, and they're jobs that will be across the country, not just on the East Coast, but on the West Coast too, and along our rural and coastal communities if we get the policy choices right. We see in an offshore buoyant sector the opportunities not just along the East Coast, but along the South Coast and the West Coast. It is important to note that the sea area that Ireland has is 7 times greater than our land mass, and it is that offshore potential that we really do need to tap into by making the right policy choices today. In Wind Energy Ireland, we're proud to collaborate with SkillNet Ireland in a joint initiative known as the Green Tech SkillNet. We have recently, through Green Tech, proposed a new funding for a 3-year strategy which will seek to dramatically scale up the amount of training and reskilling opportunities available to people looking to join the green revolution. And we very much look forward to continuing to work with SkillNet Ireland to make that a reality. One concluding thought, maybe before I hand over to the other panelists. I was reminded recently by Paul Dean, who's a UCC researcher, speaking at a recent conference. Every single hour in this country, we spend 1 million euros every single hour importing fossil fuels. That's money leaving this country because we're not yet sufficiently tapping into the natural resources we have here right now in this country to be energy independent. So if there's one simple message to leave you with tonight, how do we stop spending 1 million euros per hour importing fossil fuels? It's by tapping into that natural resource that's available to us from wind, from solar, from other renewable technologies to build a truly independent, sustainable and carbon-free energy supply for this country. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to come and speak to you, and looking forward to the questions and answers.
Thanks, Dave. I have a presentation. Thank you. So my name is Mairead Hogan. I work for ESB, and I'm going to go through Onany Wind Farm. I'm going to explain how it's transformed from brown to green. I'm going to show you the history of it, and I'm also going to look at lessons learned. What are the lessons we learned from Own Any that we can use for our plethora of offshore and onshore projects in the future. I have a short video which I'm going to show first, which gives you some really good footage of how wind farms have been built. I did this video as part of the Energy and People for the European Commission during the summer. I've always wanted to work on renewable energy projects since I was young. I am Marie Togan for the Own Any wind farm. My role is environmental coordinator. So I'm responsible to ensure that all of the mitigation measures and the planning conditions are complied with. I was always interested in the environment, and I remember seeing my first wind farm, and I always thought I'd love to work on that. And my dad had always said, always go work for ESB. And 8 years ago I joined ESB, and now I work on onshore and offshore wind farms. So I'm really honoured, to be honest, to be working in this field. We're looking at 176 metre tip height. So visual and noise are always going to be issues or concerns from locals about wind farms. And as part of that, we have a lot of measures in place to ensure environmental controls, especially for ecology. We have dust monitoring, which is done monthly. We have noise, ongoing noise monitoring. We have visual inspections of the watercourses. And I'm absolutely sure that over 10 years of monitoring the birds, we now know, based on our post-monitoring, that we have not impacted either the distribution or the quantity of birds in sight. So all of the mitigation measures that were required, all of the monitoring is put into a report, and it's really transparent. And I believe that transparency has resulted in really good engagement, and I think our team are so proud to be part of that. The electricity produced from phase 1 alone is 89 megawatts, and I believe that powers about 80,000 houses. So we're looking at phase 2 doubling that, and there's also plans for phase 3. That is basically meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs, and renewable energy is just that. Thank you. So just for context, I'm going to talk about Own Any wind farm site. The site was actually formerly used for peat harvesting by Bord na Móna, and that was to provide fuel for the ESB peat-fired power station. So it's in northwest Mayo, near Ballina, and Dave just mentioned our Bellacorrig wind farm, which has 30 years of history. That's actually the same site, and I'll explain that. So how it started, what was the history of energy in this area? ESB Bellacorrig Power Station was a 40 megawatt power station, and it was in operation between 1962 and 2005. And on average, the station burned approximately 1,000 tonne of peat during a normal working day, or 350,000 tonnes per year. The Bellacorrig Power Station ceased operation in 2005, and it was demolished in 2007. And as Dave said, it's the same site as the first ever wind farm in Ireland, and it was built in 92. It was 21 turbines, 6.4 megawatt capacity in all in, 0.3 megawatt turbines. So we're now looking at 3.3 megawatt turbines, 42 metres in height. I think what's interesting here is it was actually the first wind farm built, and it was 5 more years before the next wind farms are built. There was 3 wind farms built in 97, and then in 2000, I believe, we had 12 wind farms, and in now 2020 we have 300 wind farms. So we really have progressed from, as Dave said, 47% of renewable or energy coming from our wind in October this year. So on the same site as the Bellacorrig site, Own Any wind farm got planning in 2003. But actually, due to delays in the grid, it wasn't built. And what happened then was we needed to go back in and do another environmental assessment. So 10 years later, we submitted another application in July 2013. It took 3 years to get a planning application granted. So we got planning application granted in June 2016. So 3 years in the planning process and 4 years previous to that doing the environmental work. So 7 years in total to deliver the project, and actually 2.5 to build. I think that doesn't make sense to me. I think we need more resources in planning in order to roll out the renewable energy generation that we have targeted. As part of the planning permission, we had 20 planning conditions, and that basically is conditions which by we have to abide by, and 900 mitigation measures. That's a lot of mitigation. That mitigation basically is how we manage the environmental constraints on site, and I'll explain that quite quickly. So here we have on a new wind farm during construction. Phase 1 and 2 has 60 turbines, 172 megawatt capacity. So we're looking to power 150,000 houses, and we're looking at a 176 metre chip. So from 42 metres Bellacorrig, 30 years old, to 176 metre, and that just shows how technology has evolved over time. You can actually see in the background of this, the Bellacorrig turbines are still in operation. So they're just in the back kind of corner, you'll see them there. Briefly, so what is a wind farm and how is it built? I just said I'd put this slide in just to explain. So obviously you've got a substation that connects to the national grid. It's a 110 kV substation. We have in total 60 turbine bases. We have 45 kilometres of access tracks are required to be built in order to bring the turbines in. We had an Only Bridge construction which was built to link phase 1 and 2. And we also have a visitor centre which we built, and it was a condition of planning that we build a visitor centre. The next slide just shows that when the Bellacorrig Peat Power Station was ceased operation, Bord na Móna made a decision to rehabilitate the wetland. And that rehabilitation, basically what it did was it formed the conditions to attract breeding birds. So when ESB got planning, they absolutely knew that the environment we were building on was very sensitive. We needed to minimise impact on birds, wetlands and watercourses. And I'll just show you kind of what the major constraints were. So here we see we've got river catchments. We actually have an iron flush. It's a unique hydrological feature within the wind farm site itself. We have many breeding birds, and we have an SAC contiguous with the site. So how did we manage these environmental challenges during the construction stage? We applied a full-time ECOW, Ecological Clerk Works, and I think maybe we'll get some more discussion on that later. We had a full-time archaeologist on site. We had continuous monitoring, and what we felt was a partnership approach. It was really important that the ecologists and the construction team worked really well together so that any issues could be dealt with in real time. That partnership approach also was how we manage our stakeholders. So what we decided to do was we actually developed a project monitoring committee. So the National Parks and Wildlife, Inland Fisheries Ireland, Mayo County Council and locals came together. We met on a quarterly basis and we discussed all the issues on site. And then to make it even more transparent, what we did is every month we published a 50-page document about all of the monitoring on site, and that was available to all PMC members. And we really believe that that trust built really good relationships for us during the construction phase. So these are the number of birds we have on site. And as I said in the video, we did not impact either the distribution or variety of birds. But how do we do that? The big thing was close cooperation. Nothing happened without pre-clearance checks. No road was built, no turbine foundation, unless the ecologist went in advance and said there's no breeding birds in that area. We prioritised works areas. So, for example, we knew on the northern part of phase 2, based on our 10 years of surveys, that there would be birds present because a lot of little wetlands. So we made sure that the turbines were not erected in the northern part of the site until after the breeding bird season. We delayed turbine erection, and we also had some screening. So because of all these mitigation measures, we managed to ensure that we did not impact the breeding birds on site. The next issue was actually silt management. And silt basically is a sand and it's carried by water. We built 45 kilometres of access tracks, and that actually equates to about 25,000 tonnes of silt that had to be managed on site. The challenge was to capture and retain it. And these are just some of the environmental or engineering techniques we used during the phase 1, and that was doubled obviously for phase 2. So that's the construction period. That's how we manage the environmental challenges. And then this is post-construction. So as you can see, we have a rehabilitated wetland. We've minimised impact on breeding birds, and we basically want to leave the site better than we found it. This is a visitor centre I mentioned previously. As part of planning, we stated in the environmental impact assessment that we would build a visitor centre. This is a €3 million visitor centre that actually was designed by the same people who designed the Titanic Museum in Belfast. It is basically an opportunity to showcase a rich heritage in the area. And it has many social benefits. So I talk about sustainable development. It has many social benefits whereby schools are invited to visit. and we will open it up to colleges, and it's very tangible. Kids can come in and actually go through the build little turbines. It's a great place to visit. Every time I go there, I'm, pardon the pun, but I'm blown away by it. It's an amazing centre. We also have, obviously, during the construction stage, there was a number of jobs during the construction stage, but also there's a community benefit fund, and that actually 700,000 tonnes, 700,000 euros per year is provided to the locals for developments, and that basically is managed by Mayo County Council. That's a lot of money in the area that can be used for different initiatives, and a lot of them may be energy or environmental related initiatives. To summate, so Onini has transitioned from brown to green. We've gone from burning 350,000 tonnes of milled peat per year between 1962 and 2005 to producing between Bellacorrig and Onini 180 megawatts of green energy. And that equates to about 4% of the wind produced in Ireland. And actually there is plans for a phase 3, which will be a 90 megawatt site. I think that's in the environmental impact development stage at the moment. I just want to briefly touch on the lessons that we've learned. Permitting takes time, 6 to 7 years in the planning system and 2.5 to build. I just think that's at odds. And I think that basically means that we need more resources. We are going to build double our capacity in onshore and build 5 gigawatts offshore in the next 5 years. We need resources. The workload that we have to process that is at odds with the projects we have in the pipeline. You can see also that grid was an issue. Phase 1 was not built for 10 years because of grid, and then by the time grid was fine, we couldn't build the wind farm we had planning for because technology evolves. So we had to go back into planning again. And I think the biggest thing is here is technology moves very fast. Today's projects are designed based on tomorrow's technology, and it is so important when you look at the offshore. We had 6 megawatt turbines, and now we're looking at 12, 15, 18 megawatt turbines, and it's really hard to keep pace, but you have to design your projects today based on a future that you're unsure, and it's a bit of a risk. I think we think when we have planning and we all celebrate we get a planning grant, you have to remember that everything you say in the planning permission and all the conditions have to be complied with. We have 900 mitigation measures. You are not in compliance with planning unless you manage every single one of the mitigations. It's really important to understand that. And I really think this is true for offshore too, stakeholder engagement is so important. If you work with your stakeholders and you're open and you're transparent and there's a partnership approach, projects will be delivered on time. And I think for one of the conditions of Onini was we had to have an independent auditor, and that was Mayo County Council. And I worked with Orla Burke on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, ensuring that any issue that we saw on site was resolved together in a partnership approach, and that really, I felt, helped the delivery of the wind farm. I'm absolutely sure I've gone over 7 minutes, so sorry. Okay, thank you.
Evening, everybody, and thanks very much for the introduction from Orla and Stephen there. So my name's Will Woodrow. I am a director of an environmental consultancy based not very far from here in Ballysadare, and we have been working in the area of renewables since 2010. I started the business in Sligo in 2004 with me, and we're currently at 30 staff, mainly ecologists, and we've had over those years at least 4 people have come from this establishment and worked with us. And so I was delighted to hear Orla say, in particular at the beginning, that sustainability is going to be a core part of the college's policies, because we need more people in the environmental, in the ecology sector. We are facing a capacity crisis. We have a situation where a lot of policy is hinging a green recovery on this industry, and we don't have the people in it to do that work at the moment. We've taken on people from Germany, Italy, and we've taken on people from Argentina and Zambia starting next year. So it gives you an idea that we need more people in this industry. That's a wee bit of an aside. So, But what I'd like to talk to you about is I've spent the last over a decade working on renewables projects from the ecological side of things. I also work in a voluntary capacity as basically the lead for the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, promoting good practice in the sector. And I'm really keen on making sure that the way that we approach our ecological impact assessments of renewables is done to the best of our ability. And I'd like to talk to you about what is good practice and also how failing on good practice affects our energy security, essentially, okay? So, I'd like to give you a bit of a background on, I mean, really on renewables. The face of renewables is changing. We heard a little while ago that there's a lot of emphasis on offshore. People talk about solar, they're talking about hydrogen, but really at the moment, a lot of what we're talking about is terrestrial wind, and offshore wind is developing fast as well. And really, there's no doubt that the need for renewables has never been any more urgent. That's already been set out by people before. We need it now. We don't need any obstacles in the way of achieving good, sustainable renewables. But part of that sustainability is ecological, environmental protection that we've already been talking about just now as well. So, if we think about what the ecological impact is of, or could be of renewables, in terms of solar, it's pretty limited, to be honest. You're talking about temporary loss of small areas, often in agricultural fields. Wind farms, though, tend to be put in sensitive areas. They're often in areas where other development would not tend to be allowed, and they're in there because they're in those areas because they're exposed, and the areas produce a high wind harvest, and we're looking to reap that. They're often in fairly undeveloped and remote areas. They're often high in the water catchment, where the water is particularly clean, and you'd have ecology that's associated with that. So there are sensitivities there to start with. In terms of birds, there are concerns that in some cases you could impact on them, important bird populations, in terms of collision, in terms of displacement, in terms of barriers, if you put these proposals in the wrong place. In terms of bats, there are concerns that the wind farms in the wrong place can impact on bat populations as a result of what they call barotrauma. Now, that's not necessarily the bats being hit by the turbine blades themselves, but they fly, they're very inquisitive creatures. They might see a pylon, you know, they associate it with a structure that they might be investigating to see if there's somewhere to roost or somewhere to feed, and the turbine blades pass by them and create a change in pressure such that they get internal organ failure, much as a diver would, in a deep sea diver, in a you know, if they get caught wrong, what they would call the bends. In terms of water quality, if you don't put all the measures in place that Mairead was talking about there in terms of the silt barriers, or if you put a wind farm or something in the wrong place where that is uncontrollable, then you can end up with water impacts from sediments that can impact on salmon and freshwater pearl mussels and things like that. We can result in direct loss of habitats. Now, there's a big difference between somewhere like Owenini, which is milled bog, okay? And there's opportunities for re-wetting that area and creating new wetlands. Whereas if you're looking to put a wind farm on a pristine blanket bog, then you're going to be impacting on that blanket bog. You're going to be resulting in drainage of it, and you're actually going to be resulting in changing that blanket bog from a carbon sink to a carbon source and working against all your renewables targets. And we looked at these sort of specific iron flushes and things where you might get marsh saxifrage and various really key, rare species, and we need to be able to identify where those are and avoid them so that we put our wind farms in the right places. Or even in some cases, we literally put the turbines in the right places. We miss some of these features are quite small and can be avoided by turbines. And we have designated areas, of course, as well, which are special protection areas for birds and special areas of conservation for habitats. So in order to inform where we put our wind farms and where we don't put our wind farms, we need really good surveys and assessments. And things have dramatically changed since we started putting up wind farms. We now have a minimum requirement for 2 years surveys for birds, for example, for onshore wind farms. Similar for offshores. Offshore surveys can take even longer. Minimum 1 year for bats. We need to make sure that we're surveying in the correct season to make sure that we know where these iron flushes are, we know where these rare habitats are, and we can avoid them. And then we need to link that with really detailed and solid modelling of to inform our impact assessment. And that's collision risk modelling for birds, but also understanding of what the impacts may be in terms of drainage, etc., how that may influence the habitats. And in those situations, it's really important that we as ecologists are talking to engineers and other people to understand how all these things interrelate and work. So that's what we need to do to make sure that we make the right decisions. But if you look on, if you start doing some Google searches and look for planning refusals, you'll find that there are headlines like bats stop wind farm, birds stop wind farm, or swans stop wind farm. And so often there are refusals that are the result maybe of, if you start digging into those decisions more, you start getting information on insufficient evidence. Things like those sorts of things coming up. It's a lack of robust surveys or assessments, often in many cases. Or in some cases, there wasn't a constraint study done early enough, and the money behind the project has pushed it so far that they don't want to stop. Okay? So it's really important to think about things at an early stage. So those are the sorts of things that come up. So what do we do to avoid this happening? Well, the first thing to do is early consideration. There's a lot of people chasing very few sites now for onshore wind in particular. You need to understand your site and do surveys early on so you can figure out if there are ecological constraints and present that to the developer at a time where there hasn't been so much money invested so that you can make the right decisions at the early stage. You need to make sure that you do the proper survey specifications so that you can defend those when the proposal goes into planning, and there is no reason to refuse a proposal on that basis. And the reason why all this is important is because if you get proposals that come in to planning stage and get refused, then that sets that back by maybe 3 years, and suddenly you don't have the number of wind farms coming through that we need in order to reach our renewable energy targets, which are so fundamental to what we have to achieve. They help us to alert on early issues, and really we need to, I often have had conversations with wind farm developers and backers on ecological constraints, whether it's to do with bats, and they might actually start to ask us to do some modelling of what are the conditions where we get the bats active in these areas, and if we shut off the turbines at these specific times of year and in these specific weather conditions, what does that mean to how much wind yield we will lose, and what does that mean to the economics of the project? So we need to be working with economists and engineers and everybody on these issues. We need robust modelling. We need good quality mitigation, not normally 900 mitigations. That's quite extreme. We need to learn from other wind farms of what they've done and what they've learnt, and often there isn't a sharing of information, which is what we need. We need to think about cumulative assessment, and more we need to think about enhancement. And it was great to see the O&N and what they're doing there in terms of re-wetting areas, because we need more wind farms that actually enhance areas. They're a great opportunity to create wetlands and enhance areas and offset impacts. And that's really what we should be looking at, is a net benefit of these wind farms rather than just achieving the bare minimum of offsetting impacts. We need the right people, and it's great to have establishments like this that are training people up to do the right things. So, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Will, and thanks to Dave and Mairead also. I think we got some kind of a broad brushstroke of different perspectives there, from the national to the local, and to the good practices and wider impacts around that, as Will finished up with. So I'm going to go to questions now. Because everybody in the room braved the cold night to come out, I'm going to give first refusal to the room, where Kieran is there with a microphone. So if anybody has a question, please, or a comment indeed, please raise your hand and we'll take it now. We'll come back to the room later on as well. Oh, great. Yeah.
Hello, Brian McCann's my name. The last question up there, I put it up on Slido as well, but anyway, so just thanks very much to the presenters. Really interesting to see, you know, how we're developing our wind farms across the country and the ecological issues. I'm a lecturer in ATU Sligo in environmental engineering. I just wonder, is the issue still there that, you know, the wind isn't always blowing at maybe at the rate that we want it, and we don't necessarily get the megawatt, the capacity that we need to mean that, you know, we don't need to burn fossil fuels to keep our electricity supplies at the level we need them to be. And I just wonder, what else can we do with RES? What comes to mind to me would be two things: solar PV, solar farms, which we've been way behind. We're one of the lowest rating countries in Europe for solar PV, or we have been. I know we're starting to ramp that up now in the last few years. And then, and that doesn't just mean solar farms, but also solar in individual buildings, you know, and in commercial and with dwellings. And then I just wonder what contribution that can make to ensuring that we have good contribution to the grid throughout the year. And then finally, the second point I would ask about would be what type of storage do we need for our wind electricity that we generate? What type, have we enough storage? Are we utilising that storage to balance the grid so that we don't have to switch on the fossil fuel power stations?
Thanks very much. I might go to Dave, you on that first, and then I'll let the other panellists come in.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for the question, Brian. I totally agree that, and we'd be the very first to say that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, so what you need is a mix, you need a balance. I guess we see towards 2030 very clear signals now from the government that it's not just growth of onshore wind and offshore wind, it's also huge growth of solar. And as you mentioned, it has been late to the party, I suppose. We connected our first large-scale solar to the grid this year. The very first large-scale solar is now supplying energy to the national grid. We've seen some really successful results for solar at commercial scale in the first 2 rounds of the new auction scheme designed for renewable projects that this government have introduced. So we will, no doubt about it, see lots of solar rolled out at commercial scale over the next couple of years. That's 100% going to happen, and we'd very much welcome that because it actually does correlate quite well to wind. So you typically find if it's windy, it's not sunny. If it's sunny, it's not windy. So they actually do work quite well together. There's also huge, I think, growth, and I know plenty of people in the business of installing now domestic solar as well, and domestic solar has really ramped up. Lots of people are putting solar on their roofs. They're seeing the benefit in terms of lower electricity bills. I think it's really welcome. In recent months, we've seen the government move to remove the planning obligations for that. So you can now go and put rooftop solar on domestic buildings without the need to go for planning permission. I'm sure my colleagues here can expand on that, but certainly that's really important as well. Just in terms of the second question around energy storage, 100% also needed. We in Wind Energy Ireland also work closely with the Energy Storage Ireland Association, who are looking to install batteries alongside renewable projects, wind and solar. Initially, I think to date, most of the focus has been short duration batteries. I think we've got about 600 megawatts on the grid as of today of this short kind of 2 to 4 to 6 hour battery duration. We do, in the longer term, need that to move to longer scales. So there's a lot of discussion at the moment in industry along the lines of long duration energy storage, so up to days or multi-day battery storage. There's also a lot of talk about hydrogen. A lot of people would say hydrogen can solve a lot of problems. Definitely storage is one of them. It's potentially some years away yet, but there is an awful lot of research going into that long duration storage piece, because when we do get to a grid where it's predominantly renewables based and non-dispatchable power, I suppose, as it's technically known, we do need to have that backup facility at hand as well. So all of those issues, I suppose, they're either being researched or acted on upon right now.
Thanks a million. Mairead, Will, do you want to come in on that?
Just add to that, I suppose.
Yeah.
I completely agree. We need a diversity of solutions and a variety of skills. There's not one solution will fit all. ESB have 1,000 megawatts of solar in the pipeline, and I think when it comes to storage, it's very important. We need to store our excess energy. I think at the moment ESB are working on a Money Point Hub, which is a hydrogen facility. It is a couple of years off, but also we've just installed 2 batteries, one in Cork and one in Dublin, and we intend to install many more batteries. So we absolutely have to manage the wind we do produce and ensure that it works best for us. Thank you.
Will.
I suppose just to say from a lot of the clients and developers that I've worked with, what I'm seeing is that that the aspects such as solar is likely to piggyback off the back of wind because of the costs of cabling and connection, and often the finances, as I understand it, don't stack up until you're able to do that and piggyback one off the other, and of course then hydrogen will come back. So I think it is going to continue to be wind that's leading it, but I think there is a need for a mix, and I think that will come as well.
Thanks a million. We'll stay in the room, yeah.
Good evening. Can I just ask the question of nuclear power, and why is nuclear power being looked at as an option in Ireland now, other than the history of it in Ireland has just been to completely ignore it? When you look at France, who are getting somewhere, I think it's like 70% of nuclear power or electricity from nuclear. Why aren't we looking at something like that also?
Thanks very much. Dave, Mairead, do you?
David?
I can have a go, and look, I'll invite the others in as well. It's a fair question. Look, I think the policy choices across successive governments have been very clear that nuclear just doesn't form part of the debate in Ireland. There, I suppose, is a ban on it technically in legislation right now, so you can't go and build a nuclear facility. We do, I suppose, recognise that when you look at someone like France, they've got a huge, demand for power. The scale of their system is so large. When you contrast that to Ireland, a lot of the arguments against nuclear would say that the system as a whole is just too small to have these huge nuclear power stations just dumped into various parts of the network. Having said all of that, I suppose there is a big push in certain circles towards what are known as small modular nuclear reactors, so modern technology, which is a much smaller scale. And I have heard it being said by researchers, there is research being done in colleges around this, that maybe in the future that is something the country should look at again. I guess for me, and this is a personal opinion, the big challenge with it is the timeline it would take to actually deliver nuclear, given where we're coming from with the ban in place right now. And I'm just not sure, I'm just not convinced myself personally that is something this country has time to spend debating before we'd even get a sod turned. We do not know that there are other proven solutions out there that we can hit the ground running with today, and we've talked about some of them there in the previous question. And I just think that is potentially the reason it doesn't get the airing, is because we do have other solutions at play. But look, I'm agreeing with you. It is something that this country probably doesn't talk enough about. We would happily be part of discussions around it. I'm just not sure it would work out for us on the economics and the time it would take to deliver.
Will, I might ask you to come in, because I'm conscious you have a lot of previous experience in the UK as well, where nuclear is
but I wouldn't have experience in that area.
Yeah.
But I suppose what I was going to say was that if you went to France, they simply do not have the wind available to them that we do. I mean, we have pretty unique conditions in Europe for wind energy, and we have a need for energy at times when the wind is blowing. It's as simple as and straightforward as that as well.
I think also our sea area is 7 times our land mass, so we have the availability to unlock a resource of offshore wind, and I think we should do that, and I think we can do that. That should be first.
Yeah. Another question. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So it's kind of almost funny hearing that we need more wind turbines, but they take ages to get kind of approved and reviewed and everything. But that we also need to be doing more reviewing and more approving of these processes to get them out there. And I'm kind of wondering, how could this be? So information sharing is obviously a huge factor in kind of speeding these things up potentially. But at either the European level or the national level, what kind of administrative actions could be taken from the government or the European Union to kind of help facilitate and streamline the development of these?
You go first, then Mairead. Yeah.
I think it's absolutely true. The pipeline of projects that are waiting to be delivered in Ireland is at odds with the workforce that needs to process them. And I think maybe we need to have like an energy or a climate literacy whereby we explain what's required, because we need these applications processed at speed appropriate for the crisis. I absolutely concur. I don't, it's not a case of railroading planning decisions, but it's about making good decisions fast. And to make good decisions fast, we need more resources. We need more resources in government institutions, like on board Panola, like local authorities, national parks, and that is the only way we will get this infrastructure built on time. We say that there's a statutory objective of making a decision within 18 weeks. Wind Energy Ireland have done a study recently, and it takes them more like 69 weeks, 3 times longer than it should to get a permission, a planning or a decision made. And we always expect that that these projects go to court. We always expect, when I say we're going to develop a project, we're going to submit it in June 2023, we expect 1 year to make a decision, we expect an appeal, we expect an additional review, and that can't happen. If we're going to meet our 2030 targets, we need resources, and we need streamline, and we need a statutory objective whereby it takes 18 weeks to make a decision. That's what we need.
Well,
and I don't think anyone's saying we need more reviewing. What I was saying is we need solid and robust assessments so that you don't get tripped up at the planning stage by submitting something insufficient. That's the key. When you submit it, it needs to be sufficient, and part of making it sufficient is information being passed out to developers and people involved to ensure that everything follows the route it should do, so that you don't get set back 3 years when it comes to planning. That's the issue.
Yeah, good.
And Dave, I might add another just angle to that question. Is it feasible, or is it, what are the prospects of reaching the renewable energy targets that we have with the current planning system that we have?
I think it's going to be really challenging. I think it's just about doable. It was mentioned there by Mairead, the recent analysis that we've done and we've published, which shows, that statutory timeline of 18 weeks is rarely being met. And that's a timeline set by On Board Planola themselves. And they're failing to meet it. And to be fair to them, I think that's, as Mairead points out, a resource issue. It's not easy to get resources, and that goes back to what I was saying when I was speaking earlier. The opportunities here to get more people involved across permitting, across ecology, across engineering, and that's before we even start talking about offshore. We have the need to double effectively the existing capacity for onshore. to hit the 2030 target, we have to build potentially 5 gigawatts of solar on top of that. And then we need to go offshore and build the same again. And this is all happening in parallel in the next 8 years. So when you stack them like that, you realize how much we need to ramp up the entire sector. And this is competing with other areas of the economy, such as retrofitting of buildings, getting EVs on the roads. It really is a perfect storm, but it is a really good opportunity at the same time. And it's that opportunity, I suppose, that we all need to be hopeful about reaching. So I'm optimistic. I'll put it to you like that, but it is going to be really, really challenging.
Can I?
Yeah,
can
of
I
course.
Just to come in on that. I don't know if people are aware of bits of European legislation like the Habitats Directive, the EIA directives and things. A lot of the challenges to the application, the legal challenge to the application of those directives have in recent years have come from Ireland, and a lot of the shaped case law on their application within the EU, a lot of it has come from Ireland, and there's no point pretending that that's not the case. We need to deal with those situations head on and make sure that all our assessments are absolutely robust. It's as simple and straightforward as that. You're not going to make those go away.
No, fair point. I'm going to actually turn to Sligo now and actually turn offshore. And there's a question from John Heffernan that I'll put to the 3 members of the panel. With the finite amount of suitable onshore wind farm locations likely to drive developments offshore, where do you think the gaps in the current technology, knowledge-based planning and environmental legislation which will need to be addressed to facilitate more offshore developments? Who would like to take that one first?
I can kick off. Yeah. It's quite a long question. It's probably several questions in one. So clever strategy by John. But look, I suppose before we talk about offshore, it's important again to reiterate the point. Offshore, because of its nature, it's a new industry. It's several years away. The ticking time bomb that is carbon emissions and carbon budgets has already started for the current decade. We're going to need to see onshore continue to deliver for the coming years. And there will definitely be a drive towards offshore in the second half of the decade, but we've a lot to do before we get to that point. And I just want to reiterate that point. On the specific question of offshore and the skills gaps, I suppose the technology itself is well proven. Our nearest neighbours are the world leaders in terms of offshore. They have a huge amount of what's known as fixed foundation technology already deployed. They've got an entire supply chain established. They've got the ports facilities there. I suppose what we're lacking right now is actually having all of that stuff ourselves. So the real question for me is, when it comes to deploying these first offshore wind farms in the second half of this decade, are we going to do it here ourselves and create jobs at home through our ports, through our supply chain, through our coastal communities, or are we just going to import all of this existing technology, all of this existing infrastructure that's already established in our nearest neighbours? That, to me, that's a policy choice, and it's something we talk a lot about in industry right now. We recently published a ports assessment study which looked at the suitability. Right now, Belfast is the only port in this island that can actually kit out these offshore wind farms. So if we want to build all the wind farms we say we want to build by 2030 along our east and south and west coasts, we're going to need to start building up the port infrastructure as well. I might pass the planning and environmental piece across to Mairead.
I think there's many challenges for offshore wind. There's planning and there's engineering. Planning is timelines, resources. We need more people in the industry to make decisions fast. And I think that is the key concern I have for meeting their ambitious targets. If we want to get to 2030, we need more people, we need more resources, and I see that as the biggest problem. ESB has 5 megawatts of offshore wind in the pipeline, and I think for us the major engineering risks are that the projects are designed based on tomorrow's technology. And what I mean by that is we're trying to do an environmental assessment of turbines that maybe not even built yet or not even designed yet. We need the design envelope, and that's key, is to ensure that we're assessing an overall envelope rather than a specific turbine. I think also port infrastructure is a big concern for us, and developing a supply chain. Ireland's a relatively small market, so we need to show industry that Ireland's a good place to do business. We will not show industry that Ireland's a good place to do business unless we are competitive, unless we are reliable, unless we are predictable, unless we can show that we can deliver a project within a certain time frame. And currently, I don't believe we can do that.
In terms of the knowledge gaps and things in ecology, it's moving very, very, very fast actually on the offshore side. Our company is part of a bigger group called the APEM Group, who specialise in a lot of offshore remote surveys, and they use aircraft with LiDAR, for example, taking photographs of birds. The LiDAR is able to actually calculate the flying height of the birds, and they have automated software that identifies the birds, and this sort of technology is moving very, very fast in order to properly inform impact assessments for offshore. And you know, for example, this week I've been talking to people in the UK, the US, and in Denmark on offshore bats, and so there's a lot of information sharing going on. Where I was talking to the US people in the US Fish and Wildlife Service who've been monitoring offshore sites for bats for a while. So there is a gap, but it's closing fast, and the reason it's closing fast is because there is money being made available to look into those areas, and there really is a need to understand these issues so that we can make the decisions.
Thanks very much. This next question, Mairead, I might just put this one to you just in the interest of time, which is the average life cycle of wind turbines.
Yeah, I saw that question. So basically, ESB's first wind farm was 98. In Crockhenny wind farm, and we're looking currently at repowering it, and a lot of projects in Ireland at this stage are 25, most wind farms are 25 years old. Bellacorrig, as you can see, 30-year birthday, so it's 30 years old. And actually what's interesting in Bellacorrig, when I visit Onini, you can see the Bord na Móna operatives actually taking the blade down and fixing it themselves, because they've been working on it for so many years. But I think that we're coming to a repowering project, so basically a lot of our wind farms are 20, 25 years old. That's their life cycle, and we're looking to see how we can repair them. So 5 turbines in Crockhenny would probably be only 1 turbine today, and it's trying to manage that and look at the environmental constraints that happen since, because often the SACs are designated areas in an area now that wasn't there in the past, and we have a lot more stringent guidelines. So we're looking at a repowering plan. In relation to recycling, I'm unsure. We're doing the commission management plans. Somebody in ESB does know this answer, and if you want, I can find out for you.
Perfect. Thanks very much. I might take one more from the room if we have anybody left who would like to ask. Yeah, go ahead. Why not?
Just with regards to wind farms and turbines, any views on the setback distance from people's homes, what they should be? And I'll ask one last one then.
Yeah.
Predict the future. 10 years from now, will Ireland be a net importer of power or a net exporter of power?
So I might ask the 3 panelists to predict the future, and whoever has the knowledge to give me the setback distance can come in on that one first.
Yeah, so currently it's 1 kilometre, and I think correct, it's 1 kilometre.
So I think it's a really good question. One of the outstanding policy measures from government that we've been waiting for years upon years for clarity on, and you might be aware of this, is the wind energy guidelines. They've been out for draft consultation. Now, every time the Climate Action Plan gets refreshed, we look at the date for the publication of the wind energy guidelines, and it always is a new date, and it's always a date into the future. So until we see that, I think we can't really say. What I do know is that when it comes to developing onshore wind farms, it's the community engagement aspect that is crucial to it all. And my colleagues here, I'm sure, will attest to it, but it's rare these days that you'll have a wind farm that looks the same after that consultation period as it did going into it. Turbines are moved around, locations are changed, not driven necessarily by the wind energy guidelines, because we don't have clear sight of those, but because of what locals have to say about the project. And to me, that's the crucial point. Will I predict the future?
Please, yeah, why not?
Or do my best?
Yeah, do your best.
One of the big pieces of work Wind Energy Ireland published earlier this year was our new strategy out to 2025. Front and centre of that is this 2035 goal. So 2035, slightly more than 10 years, that we will be a net zero carbon electricity system. So what that means effectively is we'll have a grid running completely on renewables, backed up by other technologies such as storage. Can we get there sooner? The reality is, if the overall ambition the government has shown for a net zero economy is to be achieved, the power sector is going to need to do the heavy lifting there. We've seen that in the recent sectorial budgets. The emission reductions being pushed onto the power sector are the highest across the entire economy. So we need to get there quickly. We will have more interconnection in 10 years' time. We're currently building 2 projects, one to the UK, one to France, hooked up to our grid. We're going to need to see more interconnection. But yeah, I do think we will be an exporter of energy, as you say.
I concur with David, but I think if we're going to be a net exporter of energy, we need to take ownership and responsibility for our energy production now. I think we can't wait. In 1929, we harnessed our natural and renewable resources by building Arctic Russia. We used 1/5 of the state budget to do that, and we had ambition and vision then. In 2004, we built one of the first offshore wind farm projects was built in Arklow in Ireland, nearly 25 years ago. So I think if we take the ambition of Arctic Russia and Arklow, we can meet our targets, but I definitely think we need resources. We need to show industry that we're a good place to do business. We need to be competitive, we need to have certainty in our planning system, we need determination and political will. And if we have all of that, yes, we can be a net exporter.
For me, the big issue is offshore wind, and that would be the thing that would unlock it. From an ecological perspective, the issues associated with offshore wind are different from terrestrial, in that the ocean areas are they're used by birds and everything, and the potential for impact is much more difficult to understand, and it's associated with currents and availability of food and all those sorts of things. And I think it's something that it would be needs to be unlocked by a national approach to understanding cumulative effects and determining appropriate areas for development. And if you do have that, then, and that's a big ask, then I think you have the potential to be an energy exporter.
Thank you, and I might leave that as the last word. I want to thank the three of you for really fascinating insights and really honest responses to a lot of really good questions. I'd like to thank Atlantic Technological University for hosting us once again. I want to thank the European Commission as well for allowing us, for supporting this event on their behalf. And Katia is with us from the European Commission here tonight. So thanks to Katia and her team. Thanks to our own team in European Movement Ireland as well. But most of all, thanks to you for coming along and for tuning in. I hope you found it useful and safe home on this pretty cold night. Thanks very much.
You want a peaceful Europe. You care about your family, your friends, and your kids' future.
That's why you want to protect the climate and the planet. You stand up for your values.
You believe in democracy and in freedom, and in clean, renewable energy made in Europe. Sure, there's a lot to do.
And we can do it. We're in this together. With you.
You are Europe.